Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the meeting. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. The time is 1:02 p.m. Eastern, and we'll now start the virtual public scoping meeting for the environmental review of the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Commercial Construction and Operations Plan for commercial lease OCS-A-0508, offshore North Carolina. Thank you, everyone, for participating. My name's Pam Chanel, and I'll serve as the facilitator for today's meeting. I'm with ICF, the independent third-party contractor supporting the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. I do want to note that this meeting is being recorded, and if you do not wish to be part of this recorded meeting, please disconnect from the call. The recording of this meeting will be posted to the project website. Let's go ahead and review the agenda for today's meeting. We'll begin with a series of opening remarks and presentations, which should take about an hour. First, Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy for BOEM, will provide a few opening remarks. Next, I'm sure that many of you have become familiar with Zoom over the last year, but we'll review a few tips for the Zoom platform, and I'll point out some of the key features that we'll be using today. We'll then move into a few presentations. The first presentation is a brief background and a history on the offshore leasing process, given by Will Waskes of BOEM. Following Will, Brian Krever, the BOEM Nepa team lead for this project, will provide an overview of the environmental review process. And finally, Megan Higgin with Avangrid will provide an overview of the proposed project. At that point, we'll take a quick break to let folks stretch before we reconvene to take public comments. Following the formal public comments, we'll take another quick break and conclude with a question and answer session. So you can see we have a full agenda for today. Let's go ahead and get started. And again, thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to introduce Michelle Morin, the Chief of the Environmental Branch for Renewable Energy for BOEM, for some introductory remarks. Michelle?
Yeah, thank you, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. As Pam said, my name is Michelle Morin, and I am the Chief of BOEM's Environment Branch for Renewable Energy. And so I want to welcome everyone to the second of our 3 virtual public scoping meetings for BOEM's review of the proposed Kitty Hawk offshore wind project. I wish we could be meeting in person, but we have found this technology an effective alternative to our in-person meetings. We've held over 24 such meetings over the past year and a half. For those of you that are not familiar with BOEM, or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, we are a bureau within the Department of the Interior, and we oversee the development of our energy and mineral resources on almost 2.5 billion acres of the nation's outer continental shelf, or OCS. And it's our job to ensure this development is done in an environmentally and economically responsible way. All of our activities are supported by a robust environmental program, which ensures that we're developing and also using the best available science and information in our decision making. And public involvement is really very essential to all of BOEM's programs, particularly BOEM's Renewable Energy Program. Your input plays a really vital and key role in our environmental analysis and ensures the best informed decision, not just for this project, but all proposed projects. So thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn more about our environmental review process and the proposed project. We had about 80 individuals pre-register for today's meeting, which is, I think, a good turnout. And there's about a dozen members of BOEM participating in this meeting, so they can hear directly your comments, but also help answer any questions you may have. And so I'll turn it back over to Pam to proceed with the meeting.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So I just want to take a minute or two to review the features that we'll be using during our Zoom meeting today. At any time during the meeting, if you need assistance with the Zoom platform, you can use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to message the meeting host, or you can send an email to kittyhawk@icf.com. That's KITTYHAWK@ICF.com. So we appreciate your participation in this virtual public scoping meeting. As Michelle said, we'd much rather be having this meeting with you in person, but with the current conditions, we want to provide all the information that we can while protecting everyone's health. So we'll work to conduct this meeting in a manner that closely resembles that of an in-person meeting. I'd ask that you please make note of the phone number for this meeting. The phone number is 1-888-788-0099. The meeting ID is 810-777-98424. The password is 783-16145. If you experience difficulty with your internet connection at any point during the meeting, you can call this number to listen to the meeting. Additionally, individual internet connections and bandwidths can vary, and it may impact your viewing experience. So we recommend closing all apps and programs and limiting other streaming or downloads while you're participating in this meeting. And finally, we're running this meeting using Zoom Webinar, which mutes all participants and restricts video feeds. So when we get to the public comment portion of today's meeting, the meeting host will unmute you so that you can make your statements. For any media representatives who joined the meeting today, please contact Bev Winston, the Public Information Officer, at beverly.winston@boem.gov or beverly.winston@boem.gov. So before we begin, I want to review just some ground rules for today's online public scoping meeting. As stated previously, we'll provide several presentations before accepting formal comments, and then BOEM will answer any clarifying questions raised during the meeting. When we get to that formal comment period during today's call, I'll call on the people who requested to make a comment when they registered. All names will be called in the order in which we received your registration. After all those folks have commented, I'll ask if there's anyone else who would like to make a comment. At that point, you would use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom platform, or if you're calling in from a phone, you'll press *9, and I'll call on people to comment in the order in which they raise their hands. During that comment period, I'll post the names of the next 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn is coming. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on your screen, or those of you on the phone, you'll hear a prompt that'll allow you to unmute yourself and make a comment. Throughout today's meeting, if you think of a question that you'd like to have clarified, please type your question into the question and answer box on the Zoom platform at the bottom of your screen. When we get to the question and answer portion of today's meeting, BOEM staff will answer your clarifying questions. Please note that when we receive your questions and the team begins working on an answer, we'll move your question to what's called the dismiss category within that question and answer box. And then once the response is ready, we'll read your question and provide an answer aloud. We'll review all of this again before the question and answer period and before the comment period. So please keep in mind that this meeting is being recorded and transcribed, and I'd ask that there be no inappropriate language. We do have a large number of participants on the call who previously registered to speak, so we'll be asking everyone to keep their comments to no more than 5 minutes. Scoping comments may also be submitted through regulations.gov or through the US mail. All comments, whether received orally or in writing, are weighted equally. We appreciate the opportunity to share these project updates and the environmental process with you all. Again, we wish we could be together in person, but we're glad to be able to come together virtually. And the purpose of this virtual public scoping meeting is to share information about the project and to receive your public scoping comments. We're now going to start with the presentations for today's meeting. Our first presenter is Will Waskis of BOEM. Will?
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Will Waskis. I am BOEM's project coordinator for the Kitty Hawk lease offshore North Carolina and Virginia. Today, I'm going to be providing kind of an overview of what was roughly kind of a 6-year planning, 6 or 7 year leasing and planning process that led up to where we are today with the Kitty Hawk project. Hopefully, you'll find this information informative as you're developing your comments as part of the scoping process. Next slide. So this slide here illustrates essentially BOEM's authorization process from kind of a 30,000 foot level. It's broken up into 4 major steps. There's the planning and analysis stage, the leasing stage, the site assessment stage, and the construction and operations stage. Next slide. So what we're going to be focusing on for this presentation is really going to be the planning, analysis, and leasing stage that you see outlined in this red box. Next slide. So if we zoom into that, there's a few kind of milestones just to make everyone aware of. Kind of the first steps of that process are either a request for information or a call for information and nominations. In the case of Kitty Hawk, that was the call for information and nominations. Essentially, it's a Federal Register notice looking for developer interest as well as information on environmental resources and multiple uses in the area. That goes out for public comment. We take those comments and go through an area identification process, which is really trying to look at that interest, look at the multiple use issues, look at the environmental resources in terms of how do we further refine that area into something that we may think is suitable for leasing. So once that area is identified, we move into what is more of really the start of the leasing process that kicks off with an environmental assessment to support the issuance of a lease. So in the leasing process really composed of the 3 major steps: a proposed sale notice, a final sale notice, and then ultimately an auction. Throughout this process, all these steps in the process are what we call BOEM's intergovernmental task forces. So they are really kind of a critical component to our review process. And they start all the way back from the beginning, but they continue on throughout the process. Next step. Oh, sorry, next slide. So the first step, and again, as I noted, is developing an area to include in that call for information and nominations. So, and as I noted before, a critical component of that is the BOEM North Carolina Task Force. So that task force was established in 2011. So, and in trying to define that area, we really pulled information from all the available studies we had at the time. There was quite a wealth of information that was pulled from several state initiatives, as well as other federal and state funded studies. So we tried to take the lessons we had learned from doing other call area delineations and incorporate those into the North Carolina process. We tried to pull the latest data that was available to help with that process. And then as well, try to reach out to stakeholders who actually use that area, have a real keen knowledge and understanding in terms of that area to help kind of define that area. So we're really pulling all that together with the task force, kind of working together to really try to say, okay, here are kind of the recommendations to BOEM in terms of what we think would be suitable for moving forward and determining if there's interest in that area, and that would be kind of areas of reduced conflict. And you can see on the slide on the right-hand side of the picture on the right-hand side of the slide, that's kind of overlay of all the issues that we had to deal with, whether it was avian issues, marine mammal issues, water depths, geology, substation locations, so on and so forth. Next slide. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side here are the 3 call areas. So those were the areas that were ultimately included into the call for information and nominations. So the one of particular interest, obviously for today, is the Kitty Hawk area. You can see it was the largest of the 3 areas that we chose to include within that Federal Register notice that went out in December of 2012. Next slide. So what did we hear back from industry in terms of where they were interested in these call areas? As you can see by the color coding here, the darker color being the largest number of nominations, we received 5 nominations within some portion of the Kitty Hawk call area. So those were from Apex Wind, Fisherman's Energy, EDF, Green Sail, and Dominion. Next slide. So as I noted before, part of that call for information is really soliciting information on uses of that area, as well as environmental resources, conflicts, etc. So this is kind of a broad categorization of the issues that we received. Major themes were visual impacts. I would definitely say that was one of the largest number of comments, particularly from a Park Service perspective and as well as coastal communities. Vessel traffic, not only from deep water vessels that transited through the area, primarily coming out of the Port of Virginia, but as well as tug and barge routes that utilize more nearshore waters along the coastline. New information that had come out to try to incorporate, and from an environmental resource perspective, concerns for right whales and what sort of marine mammal stipulations would be instituted were kind of the major themes. Next slide. So I'm going to cover how we addressed at least what were the biggest issues that really probably had the most influence in terms of driving the shape or refinement of the Kitty Hawk area. So first and foremost, I would say was navigational concerns. What you're seeing in the center picture here is a density plot of vessels using AIS returns from vessels using that area, primarily deep draft, so cargo and tanker vessels. You can see there was quite a bit of traffic that went through that area. So to get a better keen understanding of what was going on there, we did a whole host of different analyses, whether it was a proximity analysis, how close are ships getting to each other, a directional analysis in terms of, is there a route going north versus south, or is it all heading south? Is it avoiding something or not? It did turn out that there were actually several Navy platforms out there that kind of was causing this kind of spreading and avoidance of certain areas that you can pretty clearly see in the middle graphic. Next slide. So visual was the other one. In response to the amount of feedback that we got, we did undertake what we call the visualization simulation study. We partnered with the Park Service in the state of North Carolina. We did simulations from 18 different locations under 4 different lighting conditions, using 3 different distances from shore. And we used 2 turbine models. We tried to use what was currently being used at the time, as well as what was being forecasted as a bigger machines for the future that weren't quite yet commercially available. Those being a 3.6 machine and a 8 megawatt machine at the time. Obviously, those machines have become bigger at current date. So we did open houses based on those visuals. We did them Kitty Hawk, Wilmington, Carolina Shores, and Southport, both daytime and nighttime visualizations. Next slide. So taking those 2 into account from a visual perspective and the navigational perspective, you're kind of seeing on the left-hand slide, if you will, you're kind of seeing an arc running through the offshore line, and that was essentially kind of a setback that was ultimately requested from the Park Service, from their assets, particularly the Body Island Lighthouse, really with a concern for daylight visibility, but as well as nighttime visibility that would be seen from the top of the lighthouse, as well as, again, Cape Hatteras and Cape Lookout National Seashores as well. Again, that also influences community, coastal community requests as well. And you can see the kind of 2 different shapes that you're kind of looking at in terms of within that Kitty Hawk Call area. And those were an attempt to kind of working with the Coast Guard to address what might be feasible options that took into account this vessel traffic that was running through. So on the right side, you can see ultimately what we chose. It was the furthest area from shore, really making sure it was outside of all of the existing traffic that was running out of Norfolk and along the coast. Next slide. So that area was included in the proposed sale notice. So again, that proposed sale notice essentially describes the area that we're offering for lease, as well as what your lease would look like in terms of any sort of stipulations, the physical terms, and describes how the auction would actually unfold. So that was followed by a final sale notice published in January of 2017 that solidified all of those items. And then the auction was held in March of 2017, going 17 rounds with 4 bidders, ultimately being won by Avangrid at a price of just over $9 million. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see the final rounds of how that worked out. Next slide. So that leads us up to really today. Kitty Hawk submitted their COP in December of 2020. We're currently reviewing that COP. The public version of that COP is available on the BOEM website. You can see the address there. That review is roughly going to be a 2-year process, but ultimately will end with either that COP being either approved, disapproved, or approved with conditions. And that'll be documented in the record of decision that you'll be hearing later about from Brian. Next slide. And with that, you have my contact information here at the bottom of the slide, and happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks so much, Will. Our next presenter is Brian Crever with BOEM. Brian?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Crever, and I'm the Nepa team lead within BOEM's Office of Renewable Energy Programs. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the National Environmental Policy Act process and how we will be using that to do an environmental analysis on the Kitty Hawk COP. Next slide, please. So as Will showed you earlier, we have this leasing and development process that is pretty long, and a lot of what you saw before the orange boxes as we are here is what Will covered in his presentation, the area identification process, actually going out and issuing leases through an auction. But today we are just beginning another part of our process, which is the environmental and technical review process. We're at the very beginning of that, and I will go into more detail on that as we move forward in this presentation. Next slide. So the Kitty Hawk construction and operation plan was initially submitted in December of 2020, and it underwent 2 revisions, one in June of 2021 and one in July of 2021. And that's a current version that's available on our website that is listed there. And what we're going to do after our environmental impact statement is complete is we'll either approve, disapprove, or approve with modifications. And this will be documented by a record of decision or ROD. Next slide. So the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is a procedural law that requires federal agencies to assess environmental effects of proposed actions and reasonable alternatives prior to making decisions. We often refer to the NEPA process as our environmental review. And one thing I always like to point out is it's not the National Environmental Protection Act. One thing that the law foresees is that there will be impacts from government actions. And really, it's important for the government to understand what those impacts are. And that's one of the reasons we're here today, to get that input from stakeholders. In addition, we also really value the public input part of this and the evaluation of alternatives. So can we accomplish the same thing that is being proposed, but in a less environmentally harmful manner? So some major action and decision points where we do a NEPA or we do a National Environmental Policy Act review is at lease issuance, as Will mentioned earlier, plan approval, such as a site assessment plan for a meteorological tower or a meteorological buoy, a construction operation plan, which is what we're talking about today, or a general activities plan, which would be something like a cable going to shore from a project that's not necessarily a BOEM project. And then decommissioning activities. So once the facility's lifespan is over, the actual activities of taking the facility out of the seafloor. Next slide. So kind of honing in on the actual environmental review and approval process for a construction operation plan. This is kind of where you saw that orange box earlier. We are here in the beginning of that environmental and technical review process. This is focusing in on that. And we had the COP submittal, and we're continuing our completeness and sufficiency review on that. And we're in the middle of our public scoping period right now. We published a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement in the Federal Register, and that kicked off a 30-day public comment period. And we're holding our public scoping meetings. We had our first one on Tuesday. This is our second meeting, and we have another one coming up next Tuesday. And the real key on these is receiving input on issues and alternatives. After that, we'll prepare a draft environmental impact statement with the assistance of cooperating agencies, and we'll publish a notice of availability in the Federal Register. And that'll again have a 45-day public comment period, and we'll hold public hearings on that. So another opportunity for public input. Finally, we will publish a final environmental impact statement, and in that we'll address public comments with the assistance of cooperating agencies, and we'll publish a notice of availability in the Federal Register. The last step is that we would issue a record of decision that documents the decision we make on whether to approve with modifications, or disapprove the construction operations plan. And there'll be a minimum of a 30-day waiting period after the publication of the final EIS before the issuance of a record of decision. And from notice of intent until record of decision is approximately 24 months or 2 years. Next slide. So I've said the notice of intent, or NOI, a few times already, but just a little bit about what that is. It's a document that's published in the Federal Register, and that happened on July 30th of 2021. And it really kicks off the environmental review process, letting stakeholders know and the public know that an environmental review process is beginning. And there's a link there that shows where you can actually access the notice of intent. And it's important to notice docket number BOEM-2021-0050. And it initiates that 30-day public comment period, which ends on August 30th of 2021. Next slide. So if you take away one thing from today's presentation and today's meetings, I would really hope it would be this: public comments on the NOI. It's just such an essential, important element of the NEPA process. Local expertise and perspectives really help guide our environmental analysis. And when we're able to get that, we get better informed decisions and oftentimes better projects. So the type of information we're looking for today and throughout the scoping period is significant issues to be analyzed in the environmental impact statement, sources of information to include in the environmental impact statement, any data gaps or information needs that would assist us in our analysis if we had that information, and really, really highlighting reasonable alternatives. There are other ways possibly to accomplish what the project is trying to achieve, and there may be ways to do it in a less environmentally impactful manner. And so we analyze this through alternatives, and I'll talk more about that later, but really wanted to highlight it here. And again, comments are due on August 30th of 2021. Next slide. So virtual public scoping meetings. As Michelle said, we really wish we could be there in person, especially today where it's 100 degrees in DC, and I'm sure the Outer Banks are way cooler and way more beautiful. But we're really fortunate that technology has allowed us to hold meetings in this manner where we can still achieve public input. And we've kind of gone the extra step of creating a virtual scoping meeting room where you can get all of the meeting information that you would normally get at an actual scoping meeting in person or virtual in one location. And that includes things like project posters, all the presentations you see today, as well as information on how to comment. And I believe that that meeting room link went into the chat. And so this is our second meeting, as I said earlier, and our final meeting will be on August 17th, next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Next slide. So I'm not going to read all of these, but this just gives a quick overview of some of the meeting posters that we have in our virtual meeting room. And it's everything from information on the project's design, how construction will occur, to abundance of sea turtles and marine mammals, to fisheries landings and information on that, as well as some slides that describe the National Historic Preservation Act and our processes for Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So a lot of great information there. Some of which is kind of our regular fact sheets that apply to all projects, and some is project specific for this project. So I'd encourage everyone to visit that page after the meeting. Next slide. How to comment. Another important slide here, because everything we're trying to get from the public have to be able to get it to us somehow. There's several ways to comment. One, you could either comment at this meeting. So during the public listening session, if you raise your hand and make a comment, we are going to record all of those comments, and we'll upload those to regulations.gov, just as it would be if you submitted an online comment, and we'll consider it. You can also submit comments via mail in an envelope titled Kitty Hawk EIS in that address you see there. Or the preferred way to do it, because it's just the simplest way and it's very streamlined, is to go to regulations.gov, enter BOEM-2021-0050, click the search button, and then click the comment button, and you can just submit a comment online. And again, due by August 30th. Next slide. So what is an EIS, or an environmental impact statement? It presents a proposed federal action's impact analysis on the environment. So you have a proposed action, which is what is being analyzed, the proposal we received in the construction operations plan. You have alternatives that are reasonable alternatives that can reduce or eliminate impacts. At a minimum, the National Environmental Policy Act requires that you look at the proposed action and a no action alternative, but we always strive to have a reasonable range of alternatives. So there could be, the decision maker can have a choice of more than just approving the project as proposed or denying the project as proposed. We really look for other ways that we could potentially reduce impacts and give that for the decision maker to consider. And then also effects. And it's important to note that we look at both beneficial and adverse effects in our environmental impact statement. And one note, you may have heard that cumulative impacts are no longer considered in NEPA documents after the new NEPA implementing regulations were passed in 2020. But we still basically do the same analysis. We have a very robust cumulative analysis. It's just called something else. In the affected environment description, we include reasonably foreseeable environmental trends and planned actions other than the project. So that's basically any action that is occurring in the same kind of space as the projects, and that includes offshore wind facilities. So we will look at all the other planned offshore wind facilities in the area when we do our analysis. Next slide. I won't talk about all of these, but we look at a lot of different environmental and socioeconomic resources in the environmental impact statement: biological, physical, and socioeconomic. So things you would typically associate with the environment, such as marine mammals and sea turtles. But also we look at things that affect the larger human environment: commercial and recreational fishing, tourism and recreation, environmental justice, just to name a few. Next slide. So I wanted to note on a term that you may see come up called the project design envelope, and how we review that in the construction and operations plan. Project design envelope is kind of a range of activities that the project proponent may do when they're constructing their facility. They may say we're potentially using a turbine up to this height, or we're going to use either monopile foundation or jacket foundations. And so how we go about analyzing that is we look at the maximum impacting parameters for each resource, and that could change based on resource. What affects a bird might be different than what affects visual impacts. So we look at each resource and decide what part of the project envelope will have the most impact, and that's what we analyze. Doing this avoids having to pause or restart environmental review due to project changes. It also reduces or eliminates the need for subsequent environmental reviews as the project is refined and revised after approval. And additional environmental review and consultation, however, would be required for any revisions that are outside of the project design envelope. Next slide. So concurrent environmental review and consultations, while we're doing our environmental impact statement and doing our National Environmental Policy Act review, there are several consultations that we have to do as well. These include Section 106 of the National Shore Preservation Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation Act, or Essential Fish Habitat, Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Coastal Zone Management Act. So all of this will be happening in parallel with our larger environmental review. Next slide. So one note about NEPA substitution for the National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 review. NEPA substitution is used to reflect different stakeholder needs. For BOEM, substitution equals a more efficient, streamlined approach to better integrate the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. For lessees, there are clear expectations for environmental review timelines and mitigation costs. For consulting parties and stakeholders, there's earlier and more direct input into alternatives and mitigation measures selection. And for tribes, there's a greater focus on government-to-government consultation. Next slide. And this just quickly shows where the National Historic Preservation Act fits into the larger NEPA process. And you'll see in blue is where those steps in the National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 review fit into our process. Next slide. So a little more on the NEPA substitution process for Section 106. Through this process, BOEM is seeking comments and input from the public, from consulting parties, regarding the identification of historic properties and or potential effects to historic properties from activities associated with the approval of the Kitty Hawk COP, as well as reasonable alternatives that include size, geographic, or other restrictions on construction and siting of facilities. And finally, potential mitigation measures to be analyzed in the EIS, including ways to avoid, minimize, or otherwise treat and resolve adverse effects on historic properties. So we're looking, for a lot of things during the scoping process, more general input for NEPA, and a lot of focused input on effects to historic properties under the National Historic Preservation Act. Next slide. So the EIS schedule. In early fall of 2022, we're expected to publish a draft EIS. And again, that would initiate a 45-day public comment period. Following that, in the summer of 2023, we'd be publishing the final EIS. And then in late summer 2023, we'd conclude our consultations and publish a record of decision. Next slide. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention BOEM's Environmental Studies program before the end of this presentation. It does rigorous scientific research and informs decision-making processes and fills data gaps. I just wanted to highlight a few studies that may be of interest to stakeholders in the North Carolina area. We have studies on Emf impacts. And actually one of those studies, the second bullet you see there, is actually a study that looks at a power cable and how it affects species in the environment. And it's actually observing a cable that's in place. Also, the real-time opportunity for development environmental observations, or RODEO, takes a look at existing wind facilities on the United States East Coast. So the Block Island Project and the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project. And it looks at everything from, just monitoring sound noises of what's going on during installation and operations, as well as any changes to the environment that have happened since the project's been installed, or impacts to recreation and tourism, and all that real-time data collection and monitoring that can really help inform our analysis for future projects, as we're learning from ones that have been installed. We also have studies on recreation and tourism, as well as archaeological studies specifically for the Kitty Hawk wind energy area. And all those studies can be found on our website at the link you see there. Next slide. And that's all I have today on the NEPA process. There are several opportunities to get more information. You can ask a question at this meeting, or if something comes to you later, my contact information is there, including my email address and phone number. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the environmental review process. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. Our final presenter is Megan Higgin with Avangrid. Megan?
Great, thank you, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Higgins. I am the Senior Director of Offshore Business Development for Avangrid Renewables. And on behalf of Avangrid Renewables, thank you to everyone attending this second scoping meeting today. Next slide, please. Will provided a very informative overview of the area identification process for designating call areas and the wind energy area lease auction process. My goals for today's presentation are to familiarize participants with Avangrid Renewables as a renewable energy developer and describe the development steps taken by my company for the Kitty Hawk offshore wind project after we successfully executed the lease with BOEM in 2017. The information, I should remind viewers, contained in this presentation is on the project website, which is kittyhawkoffshore.com. And I encourage all listeners to check out the website, which includes our virtual self-guided open house and provides a great deal of information about the project and the project schedule. Next slide, please. Avangrid is an energy services and delivery company with two primary lines of business. Avangrid Renewables is one of those lines of business, which owns and operates just over 8 gigawatts of wind and solar projects in operation. Our company has one of the largest renewable asset bases of any company worldwide. We are headquartered in Connecticut, and Avangrid Renewables has a well-established presence in the US, as this graphic describes, operating projects throughout, including North Carolina. In North Carolina, the Desert Wind Farm, or Amazon Wind Farm, is an onshore wind project that was the largest when it became operational in 2016 at just over 200 megawatts. Next slide, please. The Kitty Hawk lease area, which is what we're talking about today, is wholly owned by Avangrid, whose parent company is Iberdrola. This schematic shows the global offshore wind pipeline of projects owned and operated by Iberdrola. The global offshore pipeline consists of 1.4 gigawatts in operation and 2.6 gigawatts under construction. In addition to the projects in operation and construction, there's an additional pipeline of 22.6 gigawatts. Avangrid is also a 50-50 partner in a joint venture with Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, an entity known as Vineyard Wind Llc. And if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the projects that are owned and being developed by the JV, which consists of 2 lease areas offshore of Massachusetts. The furthest project along is the Vineyard Wind 1 project, which very happy to report that it's received all of its federal permits that are required for the beginning of construction. We're lucky that Iberdrola brings a multinational team of experts collaborating, as this graphic indicates, across multiple geographic locations. So the Kitty Hawk project benefits from that transfer of knowledge from the global team to our US team. Next slide, please. This video provides an introduction to the Kitty Hawk project, as well as some of the highlighted project benefits.
I'm proud to work in offshore wind. It's a rapidly growing industry, and it's bringing thousands of jobs to coastal communities. North Carolina and Virginia are home to some of the most powerful offshore wind resources in the country. And here at Kitty Hawk, we're working closely with the military and with the fishing and shipping industries to develop wind power in a safe and responsible way. We're proud that our work will have lasting benefits for generations to come.
Great. As I mentioned, the project is located offshore of North Carolina, and it is well positioned to achieve the goals listed on this slide, including the goals of both the Virginia Clean Economy Act and North Carolina's Clean Energy Plan, which sets out a 70% reduction in power sector greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. The development of the lease area has the potential to contribute to North Carolina's effort to develop 2.8 gigawatts of offshore wind projects by 2030 and 8 gigawatts by 2040. Our team is very excited to bring safe and clean energy to potentially the states of both Virginia and North Carolina. Next slide, please. So the figure on the left shows the lease area that Will described in its entirety off the coast of North Carolina and Virginia. It's approximately 27 miles offshore of North Carolina and 36 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach. The entire lease area has a capacity of 2,500 megawatts of electricity generation, which would be enough to power approximately 700,000 homes. In December 2020, the construction and operations plan that the Kitty Hawk team submitted proposed to develop approximately 40% of the lease area known as the wind development area. And this is depicted on the graphic on the left in the shaded pink capacity, or excuse me, area. This is an 800 megawatt capacity and would include up to 69 wind turbine generators with one centralized electrical service platform or offshore substation, which would be used to collect and export the power generated by the turbines through submarine cables. The purple line on the figure shows the export submarine cable corridor, which will be comprised of 2 co-located buried submarine cables. The figure on the right indicates where the submarine cables would make landfall, and this area is Sandbridge, Virginia, in Virginia Beach. The landfall area itself is a previously disturbed area. It's a parking lot where the cables would be horizontally directionally drilled to allow interconnection of the export cables to connect with the onshore cables, which are indicated in red on the figure. The route is along previously disturbed rights-of-way owned entirely by one entity, the City of Virginia Beach. Our team is also investigating North Carolina routes and landing sites as part of the PJM potential market. As I mentioned previously, Avangrid Renewables signed the offshore lease in 2017, and since that time, the development and engineering teams have been busy collecting data within the lease area as well as the onshore sites. We have a site assessment plan that was approved in April of 2020, and that afforded the team to deploy a meteorological buoy in June of 2020, where it's still deployed currently. This MET buoy collects real-time data that is available on the Kitty Hawk website, and I would encourage you to check that out if you're interested in learning more about wind speed, surface currents, wave height, etc. The team has also conducted aerial and boat-based surveys, and our project's fisheries liaison officer, Rick Robbins, is doing a great job engaging with both the commercial and recreational fishing fleets to keep them informed and engaged in the development of the BOEM approved survey plans. Next slide, please. As Will described during his presentation, this is a well-cited wind energy area, which was cited by members of the North Carolina Renewable Energy Task Force. For example, as Will made mention, to minimize impacts to viewshed resources and navigational concerns, the task force reduced the size of the lease area from the original call area. The lease area location, which avoids sensitive habitat, areas of intensive fishing, and other common marine use areas, is reflective of the input of all of the user groups, most importantly, including the commercial and recreational fisheries. Since that time of lease execution, the Kitty Hawk team has microsited the lease area in a responsible manner and will continue to do so with ongoing and future marine survey campaigns. The project team has adopted and included in the December COP the project design envelope approach, which Brian described in detail. This approach consists of a range of potential design parameters for the project. So as you can see here on the slide, it describes the various wind turbine generator sizes, foundation types, as well as other entities of the project. For example, the currently operating wind turbine generators for operating projects like the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project is at 6 megawatts. However, there are designs that are currently being tested that range from 12 megawatts to over 14 megawatts. So the project design envelope affords us as a developer the flexibility to include these technological advances as the development process progresses. Next slide, please. This slide consists of representative figures of the foundation types that are being considered by our teams and included in the COP submittal. So the monopile, which is the furthest figure on the left, is the preferred technology based on the marine data that's been examined thus far and the water depths within the lease area, which is approximately 66 to 131 feet within the wind development area. Next slide, please. Another example of the project design envelope is outlined here, showing the wind turbine generator dimensions. Again, this represents the maximum dimensions that the public would see within the wind development area. And you can see from this figure, if it's not too small, there's approximately the highest being considered is 317 meter tip height. And as Will mentioned, there have been visual impact studies that have been done by BOEM as well as our team to determine what, if any, the visual impact will be for the varying sizes of these turbines. The proposed layout is northeast by south-southwest access. And again, our project's fisheries liaison officer has been working with the commercial and recreational fishing fleets to solicit input on the proposed layout. And the structures themselves will be spaced approximately 0.8 nautical miles apart. Next slide, please. The proposed construction schedule that is included in the December COP submittal can be seen here. This schedule is based on receipt of all permits, as well as existing and operating offshore wind projects that our company has been working on. Typically, onshore construction is initiated first and takes approximately 1 year to complete. This includes building a new or retrofitting an existing onshore substation, followed closely by the installation of the onshore export cable. Offshore construction includes burial of the export cable within the cable corridor, then the electrical service platform, followed by foundations, the nacelle, and ultimately the blades being attached to the construction. Start to finish, it's approximately 2.5 years of construction. And when it's fully constructed in late 2026, the project will deliver clean, renewable energy to the grid and will avoid millions of tons of carbon dioxide emissions annually. Next slide, please. The Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project is a covered project under FAST 41, meaning that the project schedule is available for public review on the permitting dashboard. And Rebecca just posted that link, thank you. Under FAST 41, there are clear procedures for modifying permitting timetables to address environmental reviews and the permitting process for the project. The schedule that is seen here, which is publicly available, has been agreed upon by BOEM and cooperating agencies. This ensures a transparent project as well as accountability to maintaining the project schedule. The dashboard, I should mention, allows anyone to track the project schedule during the approval process, and it's a great resource for project information. So if anyone wants to know about any of the permits listed on the left-hand side of the screen, I would encourage you to check out the link that Rebecca just posted. Next slide, please. The link in the middle of the page is for anyone who is interested in learning more about the project, wants to sign up for news and email updates, and follow the project updates on social media. So I would encourage you to click on that link to explore more. And thank you on behalf of Avangrid Renewables. The team looks forward to receiving the comments and questions from those attending today's scoping meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you to all of our presenters. So in just a minute, we'll take a quick break and let folks stretch before we start the formal public comments. As a reminder, please feel free to continue to type any questions that you'd like to have clarified into that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Following the public comments, we'll have time for the BOEM representatives to respond to your questions. I'd note that we will stop taking clarifying questions at the close of the public comment portion of today's meeting. Any questions that are submitted in the Q&A box will not be considered as formal scoping comments for the NEPA process. So if you wish to make a formal comment, please plan to either speak today or to submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail. At this point, we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We will reconvene at 1:03 Eastern Time, PM. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for rejoining. I think we're ready to get started with the public comment portion of today's meeting. As a reminder, I'll first call on the names of the people who requested to make a comment when they registered for the meeting. All names will be called in the order in which we received your registration. After all those folks have commented, I'll ask if anyone else would like to make a comment. You would then use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom platform, or if you're calling in from the phone, you would type *9. And I'll call on people to comment in the order in which they raised their hand. So during the comment period, I will post the names of the next 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn is coming. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on the screen that will allow you to unmute yourself and make your comment. Sometimes that pop-up box can get hidden if you have several other windows open on your computer, so I recommend closing any extra open windows right now. If you're calling in from a phone, you'll hear a prompt to press *6 to unmute your line. Please remember that if you have any clarifying questions, you can still type those in that Q&A box on your Zoom platform. We will stop taking new questions once we've finished with the public comment period, so be sure to submit any questions as soon as you're able. Please note that when we receive your questions and when the team starts to work on an answer, we'll move your question to what's called the dismiss category within that Q&A box. And then once ready, we'll read your question and provide an answer aloud. So a couple of ground rules for us all to follow during the comment period today. The first is to please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. And I'll post a timer on the screen to help keep track of time. At the end of the time, I'll jump in and ask you to quickly wrap up to allow others the opportunity to comment. If you're not able to complete your comments within the allotted time, you can still submit them in writing before the end of the public scoping comment period, which ends on August 30th, 2021. Second, please be respectful towards everyone who provides comments during today's meeting. You each have a unique and a valued perspective, and no one comment's considered more important than another. Comments that are directed to or are about another commenter are not in line with the intent of today's meeting, and they will not be allowed. Should any comments or actions begin to distract from the purpose of this public scoping meeting, the speaker may be placed on mute or removed from the online platform. And finally, I apologize in advance for mispronouncing anyone's name. The names of the first 5 commenters will be posted to the chat box. I'll now read the names of the next 5 speakers, and I'd ask that you please raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your screen or press *9 if you're dialed in by phone. I'll call the names of the people who have their hands raised, and you'll receive that pop-up box so you can unmute. Please be sure to state your first and last name and any affiliation as you make your comment. The first 5 speakers are Aaron Carey, Shiloh Felton, Penny Hooper, Barbara Hesinger, and Scott Mcdonald. If you're here and still wish to speak, if you could raise your hand, please. Our first speaker today will be Shiloh Felton.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to comment today on BOEM's scoping process for the Kitty Hawk Wind's draft environmental impact statement. I am Dr. Shiloh Felton, Field Manager for National Audubon Society's Clean Energy Initiative. Audubon protects birds and the places birds need now and in the future. Our report, Survival by Degrees, found at climate.audubon.org, shows 389 species of North American birds at risk of extinction should we reach a global warming scenario of 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. As a result, Audubon North Carolina and National Audubon Society support the need for responsibly sited and operated offshore wind development to meet our clean energy goals to mitigate climate change. The key word here is responsible. We share BOEM's goal to develop offshore wind while avoiding significant negative impacts to birds and other wildlife. To increase confidence in the process from stakeholders and the public, reduce regulatory uncertainty and unnecessary delays, and ultimately achieve the desired outcome of little to no impact on birds and other wildlife, we have the following recommendations. 1, we ask that BOEM use the most current and best available science to provide a transparent evaluation of the potential impacts to birds from the Kitty Hawk Wind project, ensuring that the project scope and design envelope can be reasonably evaluated for potential environmental impacts, including cumulative impacts for migratory birds. And two, we ask BOEM to outline in its draft environmental impact statement monitoring requirements for the developer to document and understand potential impacts to birds from construction and operation of the Kitty Hawk Wind project, and to inform adaptive management strategies and potential compensatory mitigation needs over the 30-year project life. Baseline data should not only inform a risk assessment, but should be paired with post-construction monitoring and be adequate to inform our understanding of impacts to wildlife from offshore wind. This includes, but is not limited to, surveying the area surrounding the cable route and the project area at least 20 kilometers beyond the project footprint, as well as the project footprint itself, and incorporating turbine collision detection technology. Monitoring efforts should address a broad range of avian species which may be impacted by offshore wind. This includes marine birds with high collision and displacement vulnerability, nocturnal migrants, and species listed under the Endangered Species Act and in Virginia and North Carolina's wildlife action plans, all of which are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We will be providing more substantive written comments with our environmental partners, and I thank you again for the opportunity to provide comment today.
Thank you for your comment. Our next commenter is Penny Hooper.
Good afternoon. Wonderful presentation so far. I really learned a lot in that beginning that we had. I am representing North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. We're not an electrical company. We work through faith-based communities on climate change and our response as a moral responsibility to reduce our carbon footprint and care for all of God's creation. Our stance is that we are 100% behind renewable energy and offshore wind to reduce our carbon footprint. And we approve of this project with the same conditions that Audubon just listed in terms of using best science and protecting the species as we go through the process of building this new wind farm. I have been to your wind farm in North Carolina and in Elizabeth City, and you've done a great job there. It's wonderful for the taxpayers, and I think that we have faith in you going forward with the best management practices. I wanted to ask two questions. The first question is, when you redid your environmental responses in terms of what happened in June and July with new information, was the information taken into account on the dire straits that we are in with our right whale population in terms of that endangered species? I'm presuming the answer is yes, but I'm just checking on that. And then the second thing is an answer that I can't seem to find anywhere, and no one's quite sure what it is. After the construction of 69 turbines offshore, what will be the limitations to recreational traffic around those constructions, those wind turbines? Will people be allowed to fish in that area? The substrate being disturbed like that, it will draw in fishes. And I'm wondering if fishing will be allowed from a recreational point of view. I'm also wondering if diving will be allowed from a scuba diving point of view for folks to dive in that region and see what is attracted to the pylons that will be drilled down into the floor. So those are the two questions. The third question is just an estimate on how many of the folks for the labor involved over the next 2 to 4 years with this construction project will be local labor. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for your formal scoping comments. I would note to all of our participants, if there are questions that you have that you would like to ask of the BOEM representatives today, please feel free to type those questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom platform. And BOEM representatives will work on responses to those questions today. And again, that question and answer session will follow this formal scoping comment period. Thank you. Our next commenter is Scott Mcdonald.
Hello, Scott Mcdonald. I am the main fish buyer in the area. I represent Spots Fish Company and K&A Seafood. Where the corridor cable runs through is our backyard. Our spiny dog boats, our fleet, our shrimp fleets all work in that area. We're excited about this project. We all support it. So far, we've had great success with your liaison officer, Rick Robbins. He's done a wonderful job communicating. Moving forward, we'd like to make sure that that continues during the construction phase. We'd like you to keep in mind that our main shrimp fishery is in January, December and January, and the spiny dog fishery is typically November through March. So we would like to make sure that we're still able to work, that we don't, there's no conflict. So we definitely want to make sure that the line of communication stays open with BOEM and the construction people and our watermen and Rick, because it's important for us. This is how these guys make a living. This is their backyard. Also another concern we would have is the depth of the cable, where inside the 3-mile stretch where the cable runs through is where the shrimp fishery drags through that area. So we'd like to make sure that the cable is buried deep enough. And that's pretty much our concerns as a commercial fishing industry. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comment. At this point, those are all of the folks who had pre-registered to make a comment today. If you did not pre-register, but if you would still like to make a comment, I'd ask that you please use the raise your hand button on the Zoom platform or dial *9 if you called in using a phone. And then I'll call names in the order in which you raised your hand. You'll receive a pop-up box, which will allow you to unmute. If you dialed in by phone, you would use *6 to mute and unmute. Are there any folks who would like to make a comment today? Please use that raise your hand button on the Zoom platform. Okay, I don't see any additional hands raised to provide a formal public statement as part of today's scoping meeting. But as we've discussed previously, you can also submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail. And those would need to be submitted by August 30th, 2021. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break. And when we return, the BOEM representatives will provide answers to the clarifying questions that have been typed into the question and answer box during today's meeting. At this point, we are not going to take any new clarifying questions. The BOEM representatives will respond to the questions that have been previously submitted. So at this point, we'll go ahead and take that 5-minute break. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. While the BOEM team's working on a few additional answers to questions, I'd like to take the opportunity to just quickly review how you can make scoping comments. I'll pull up a few slides to demonstrate this. I'd like to walk you through the process of how to provide written comments on the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project Notice of Intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. Comments can be provided orally during future scoping meetings, electronically through the regulations.gov website, or in written form by mail. Please note that comments on the Notice of Intent should be submitted no later than August 30th, 2021. All comments submitted will be made part of the public record and will be posted publicly. First, I want to walk you through how you can provide comments on the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Notice of Intent electronically through regulations.gov. You're going to go to the regulations.gov in your browser, type in the relevant docket number. In this case, it's BOEM 2021-0050. You'll type that into the search bar, and then you'll press the search button. The search result returns the Notice of Intent for Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind. To view the full Notice of Intent text, you click on the underlined notice title. To submit a comment, you press the comment button. From there, you can type the text of your comment in the space provided or attach files as needed. Further down the comment submission page, please select if you're providing this comment as an individual or on behalf of an organization, and provide your name and address in the fields below. BOEM doesn't consider comments that are submitted anonymously. Once your entry is complete, you complete the CAPTCHA and press the Submit Comment button. Comments may also be submitted by mail in an envelope labeled Kitty Hawk, COPEIS, and addressed to Program Manager, Office of Renewable Energy, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, 45600 Woodland Road, Sterling, Virginia, 20166. Comments must be received or postmarked no later than August 30th, 2021. BOEM doesn't consider anonymous comments, so please include your name and your address as part of your submittal. I do also want to walk you through the construction and operations plan and the technical appendices. The purpose of the construction and operations plan, or COP, is to provide a description of all proposed activities and planned facilities that are intended to be constructed and used as part of the project under the commercial lease. The COP includes a description of all planned facilities, including the onshore and support facilities, as well as the anticipated easements needed for the project. It must also describe the construction activities, as well as activities for the commercial operation, maintenance, and decommissioning of the site. The COP forms the basis for the environmental analysis, the review of socioeconomic effects, and the operational integrity of the proposed construction, operation, and decommissioning activities. The technical appendices of the COP include the results and supporting data from the surveys done to support the planned construction and operations activities in the commercial lease area. The appendices also describe resources, conditions, and activities that may be affected by the project's proposed activities and include the environmental conditions, such as the seafloor structure and seismic activity, that could impact the proposed project activities. The technical appendices include topics such as biological survey results, archaeology, and historic property surveys. They may also include locations for offshore turbines and substations, visual impacts assessments, air quality analysis, and a fisheries communication and outreach plan. You can find the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind COP and the appendices on the Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind Project website at www.boem.gov/KITTY-HAWK. Please note that some of the information included in the COP is confidential and is therefore redacted. Thank you all for your attention as we discussed this. At this point, I think we are ready to queue up the question and answer portion of today's meeting. The first question we have is going to be answered by BOEM Representative Brian Hooker. The first question is from Dr. Elizabeth Robinson. And the question is, what's been done to protect bird populations at wind energy generation sites and their migration along the Atlantic Flyway? Brian?
Great, thanks for your question. Most of the what we've done to avoid impacts to avian species, birds and bats, has been in the siting of these facilities. Most of the facilities are located further offshore of Atlantic, the main Atlantic coastal flyways, and then further inshore from the coastal, from the offshore shelf break, where some of the other diving birds and offshore species occur. So there's a large amount of just avoidance of high density bird areas to begin with. BOEM will be looking at the information that we have, and I'll try to provide a link here in the chat with a link to the bird density. I think it's been referenced as the best darn bird map previously. A bird density report with information on where those species occur. So we'll be looking at that and information provided in the construction and operations plan provided for this project specifically, and evaluating any additional mitigation that may be necessary to lessen potential impacts to bird species. But that is definitely part of the Nepa process, and we'll be consulting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on endangered species and consulting with them under the impacts to migratory birds as well. So all that will be part of our environmental review as we move forward. But thanks for the question, and I will try to get the link in there. Oh, it looks like there we go. It's already up. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. Kyle Baker, I think I'm going to have the next question directed towards you, please. And this question is from Penny Hooper. The question was the right whale new data utilized in the June-July timeframe of 2021 for the environmental impacts?
Yeah, thanks for that question. My name is Kyle Baker. I'm a marine biologist in the Renewable Energy Program. We have reviewed the COP to ensure that it does include the most recent information for right whales, and that includes the new population estimates as well as monthly density estimates. So we can look at the June and July timeframe there. And we're ensuring that information does get included in COP, and we'll use that information in our NEPA analysis and in consultation with other agencies such as NOAA. Back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Kyle. The next question I'm going to direct to Marty Heinze. And this is sort of a two-part question. I have one component from Tamara Warren, and the question there is, will this bring jobs to our community? And sort of a follow-on to that from Penny Hooper, how many of the employees will be from the local labor force?
Hi, my name is Marty Heinze. I'm a BOEM economist. And yes, the jobs will be local. The Kitty Hawk project is expected to result in about $990 million in construction-related economic activity in the Virginia and Hampton Roads area, which includes Northeast Carolina and Southeast Virginia. This Kitty Hawk spending will support hundreds of jobs during the construction phase. During the operations and maintenance phase, which is once the Kitty Hawk project begins generating electricity, most of those jobs will also be located in the Hampton Roads area. So I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Marty. The next question I'll direct towards Dan O'Connell. And this question is from Tamara Warren. Would the substation pose any health risks on shore?
Hi, yeah, this is Dan O'Connell, I'm a civil engineer with BOEM. Now, it's not clear from the question which substation. There would be two substations on the project. The offshore substation would be located within the wind energy area, many miles from shore. So that substation would not pose any health hazards to anyone on shore. There would be a substation on on land, onshore, would be where the grid is, the cable is connected to the grid. Both substations will be secure facilities, unmanned. Only people that will be allowed in are maintenance workers who will be trained and fully protected for their health and safety. But should be no significant health risk to the public for either facility.
Great, thank you, Dan. The next question I'll direct towards Ariana Baker. And this question is from Penny Hooper. The question is, what will the restrictions on scuba diving and recreational fishing around the turbines be after they're constructed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ariana Baker, I'm the navigation analyst here at BOEM, and I'm also the Coast Guard point of contact. So this sounds to me like a question on restrictions of access, specifically vessel access. BOEM does not have the authority to prohibit vessel access anywhere on the outer continental shelf, including within any BOEM leased areas. That being said, the U.S. Coast Guard may implement safety zones within those lease areas, but this would likely be temporary during construction and localized to where the construction is ongoing. The Coast Guard has repeatedly stated that they do have no intention of permanently restricting vessel access, and this includes both recreational and commercial activities to any offshore wind project.
Great, thanks so much, Ariana. Next question is for Will Waskis. And the question is from Tamara Warren. At this time, it was a question is, at this time, is there no landing onshore site for Kitty Hawk?
There we go. Thank you, Tamara, for the question. You are correct. The Kitty Hawk COP does not include a landfall location in North Carolina. The sole landing location is in Sandbridge Beach in Virginia Beach, Virginia. There were other landfall sites that were considered but not carried forward as a proposed site that were located in North Carolina. And both of those, so the proposed site as well as those locations that were considered but not carried forward, are both described in the COP in various levels of detail. And if you wanted to look at those, you would go to Chapter 2 and specifically Section 2.1. There'll be some subsections under there that talk about each one of those.
Great, thanks so much, Will. I have another question for you, actually. This one's from Penny Hooper. And the question is, will any of the electricity come to North Carolina?
Thank you for the question, Penny. Kitty Hawk Wind currently does not have a power purchase agreement for the proposed power generation in the COP. However, they are actively exploring their options. So the proposed onshore substation is within PJM, which is the Regional Transmission Organization, which would handle the distribution of the power. And PJM does include Virginia and portions of North Carolina, in addition to a whole host of other mid-Atlantic states. But any real kind of detailed questions regarding or specific to a PPA of who may purchase that power, whether it's a state or private entity, we would defer to Kitty Hawk.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, Will. My last two questions are for John McCarty. And the first question is from Tamara Warren. And the question is, can you please clarify that these would be placed 27 miles offshore and are only visible at 315 meters?
Yeah, hi, thanks. This is John McCarty. I'm a landscape architect with BOEM, and my area of specialty is visual impact assessment. So thank you for your questions on visual resources. Yeah, the closest wind turbine is approximately 27.4 miles offshore from Yappin Lane Beach in Corolla, North Carolina. The COP Appendix AA visual impact assessment has photo simulations illustrating the visibility of both the 14 megawatt and the 20 megawatt wind turbine options at that distance from Yappin Lane Beach. So we would encourage you to go look at the appendix and look at the simulations to develop your own perspective on the visibility.
Great, thanks so much, John. And our last question for the day is from Dr. A. Elizabeth Robinson. And the question is, what measures are being used to ensure that the natural beauty of the area will be preserved?
So again, thank you for the question. And setting the lease area approximately 27 miles offshore was the initial measure that was taken to protect visual resources. Avangrid then conducted a visual impact assessment that I just referred to as a part of their construction and operations plan. BOEM then refers to this information when conducting its own visual impact analysis, which I'm a big part of that as a part of the environmental impact statement, and makes recommendations on mitigating those impacts on visual resources. Then this information is taken into consideration when making the final decision on the project.
Great, thank you, John. And thank you to everyone for submitting questions during today's meeting. Those are all the questions that were shared through the question and answer box. So I'm going to turn things over to Brian Krever, the lead environmental protection specialist with the Office of Renewable Energy Programs from BOEM, for a few closing remarks. Brian?
Thank you, and hello again to everyone. My name is Brian, as I said earlier, and I'm the NEPA team lead for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's Environment Branch for Renewable Energy. Just wanted to thank ICF and the BOEM staff for holding today's second of 3 public scoping meetings for the Kitty Hawk EIS. Special thank you to Pam for facilitating, and Will from BOEM and Megan from Kitty Hawk for their presentations. We had a really great turnout today, peaking at around 70 participants. So most of all, I'd like to thank everyone who participated this afternoon. And thanks for spending the last few hours with us and for the many thoughtful comments and questions you submitted. All the comments received today will be considered as we define the scope for the draft EIS. And I hope you found our answers to your questions useful and informative. I felt this was a really good format and forum for you to share your thoughts and suggestions on the alternatives and issues that we should be analyzing in the EIS for the Kitty Hawk project. And as I described at the beginning of the meeting, there will be an additional comment period and public meetings after the draft EIS is published in early fall of 2022. Again, I want to emphasize that your input is essential to ensure the best informed decisions will be made on the proposed project. And I think this is a goal that we all share. Therefore, I'd really encourage everyone to submit any additional scoping comments and areas that you think we should analyze, recommendations for alternatives, and submit these by close of business on August 30th. And with that said, I'd like to thank everyone again for their participation and hope everyone has a great remainder of your day. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. And thank you all for participating in today's virtual public scoping meeting. We appreciate your input and your involvement in this process. A recording of this meeting will be made available in the coming weeks on the project website. For additional information, please visit the virtual meeting room website. This meeting's adjourned.